Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. Today, friends, if you find us on YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these conversations. If you're on a podcast platform, just head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com or subscribe wherever you are listening. Today, friends, we are going to be having a conversation about self-care steps to wellness. We are going to use simple and evidence-based yet effective steps like breath, movement, nutrition, spirit for stress, anxiety, depression, and grief. What you can do for yourself to alleviate these conditions. And to have this conversation, I have two guests. Today, I have Dr. Jan Patterson. She's a cancer survivor and an integrative and infectious disease doctor. And I have Phyllis Nichols. She's a pioneer in health television and an author. They have co-authored a book, and it's called Breath for the Soul. Jan, Phyllis, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thank you, Gina. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's our pleasure.
Now, I would love to have one of you or both of you from a different perspective share what it is that led to this book, Breath for the Soul.
Okay, well, we can probably take turns on that. I'll start out, and this is kind of laid out in the introduction in the book. But, after 30 years of practicing and teaching medicine, and from my own personal experiences, like the death of my younger son and surviving cancer and several other losses, I just came to realize that traditional medicine is not all there is. And I found that there were some holistic therapies that helped me. And that led me to take training in integrative medicine at the Andrew Weil Center, University of Arizona. And, in that fellowship, I learned about some evidence-based, very simple things that people can do that empower themselves to help themselves feel better for self-care. And I found myself talking to family and patients about these things, and I really just wanted to get the message out to people because these things are very simple and easy to do. And along the way, as I was learning things, I was sharing these things with Phyllis, and she was beginning to implement some of them, and she found them to be helpful as well. So I'll let her pick up on that.
Well, my pickup will start with Dr. Andrew Weil. I used to watch him 25 years ago on PBS on Saturday afternoon. So being in health television, I've been exposed to a lot of a lot of the things that we write about in the book, but not to the depth that I have been in the last 10 or 11 years. In 2012, my husband was diagnosed with cancer for the first time. And shortly thereafter was when Dr. Jan was getting into some of these modalities, and she was sharing them with me. And I can tell you that after 3 different and unrelated cancers, a stroke, shingles, chemotherapy, radiation, and just recovery from surgery, I can tell you that a lot of these things I have practiced almost daily, and I know they work.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Now let's talk about this idea of integrative medicine and how you've applied it within this book so that people kind of understand what that means.
Well, so integrative medicine is simply integrating holistic therapies in with traditional medicine. So we're not against traditional medicine, the medicines that you need to take that, you and your doctor have decided on that you need to take. We're not recommending stopping any of those. And we recommend, talking with your doctor about any of these things. But we're just recommending some things that you can integrate to make you healthier. And some examples are breath work. For instance, in the first section of the book where we talk about stress, I talk about taking deep, regular, slow breaths. When we're stressed, we're breathing quickly and rapidly, irregularly. And that's because we're in the fight or flight mode. And what we can do to tell our body that things are okay is that we can start taking some slow, deep, regular breaths. And it turns out that that tells our body, because the vagus nerve that goes from our brain to multiple different organs in the body, including our abdomen, when it senses that we're breathing like that, it says, okay, we're all right. We don't have to run away from the tiger right now. We can relax. And so that is good for, relaxation, digestion, rest, all those different things. Our world today is so stressful. We go from stress to stress, all the time. And so unless we really take the time to do some of these things to help ourselves, we really will be in kind of endless stress. And, one of the people that wrote about stress initially and researched it, Dr. Hans Selway, he says it's not the stress that kills you, it's your reaction to it. And so we have to learn about our reaction to it. We have to take some time to take some deep breaths and take care of ourselves.
Now, that deep breathing, if you could just explain really quickly what that tells the brain. What does it do to your body when you slow down your breathing? And if I understand correctly, the 4-7-8 breath, if you could kind of plug that in here, that would be fantastic.
Yes. Okay. So just deep breathing in general, if you're feeling stressed or anxious, if you just remember to slow down your breathing and take some deep, slow, regular breaths using your abdomen and not just your chest, that tells your body, it's okay to relax. You don't have to be so stressed about this. And there are some specific breathing exercises that we mentioned in the book. In the anxiety section, for instance, for breath work, we mentioned the 4-7-8 breath. And this is something that Dr. Weil has popularized through the years, and he's found it to be really the most effective tool that he has used for people with anxiety. And you can actually, go on YouTube and find Dr. Weil doing 4-7-8 breath to give his demonstration of that. But basically, it's just inhaling for 4 counts, doesn't have to be 4 seconds, inhaling for 4 counts, holding it for 7 counts, and then exhaling with a whoosh for 8 counts. And you can repeat that 4 times, twice a day. And if you do that regularly, you're able to take longer times, longer counts, and it tones down your sympathetic, your fight or flight response.
Now, Phyllis, I remember you sharing something about how the breathing helped you. Why don't you share that?
We can only focus on one thing at a time. And I find that when I really focus on the breath, it is relaxing. My husband, who is now 80 and has just finished 8 months of treatment for multiple myeloma, does Pilates with me. And deep breathing is a part of that, the stretching and the breathing. And we begin our Pilates routine right here in our living room on the floor with deep breathing, and we finish with deep breathing. And of course, when Jan talks about breathing, I also think about diffusing essential oils, which we use a lot of in our home. And I think of those months that he was in treatment, and we would have to go to the cancer center once a week, and we would sit there for a number of hours. And I always had my diffuser necklace with clary sage, and I would breathe deeply, and it had such a calming effect on me.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about essential oils, which I'm a little soapbox, I'm always talking about essential oils because of the impact that they actually have on your body. It's amazing how they calm the parasympathetic nervous system, how they help clear the sinuses, all the things. But I think it's interesting when we talk about these modalities, the breathing, the essential oil, what we're actually saying is these are natural solutions that the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system respond to. Am I right?
Yes, that's right. And, the essential oils, it's interesting. I became very interested in the chemistry and the science of that because I found that essential oils actually were very helpful to me in my grief journey. And, there was one oil in particular. It's a blend called Valor, and it has like blue tansy and frankincense and spruce. But it's just a wonderful I haven't met
Yeah.
anybody that really doesn't like it. So anyway, but I found that to be very helpful. There's another one called Joy that has citrus and bergamot, so it's very brightening. And you know what happens is that these molecules go up into your nose and through the smell nerve or the olfactory nerve, and that goes directly up into the limbic system of your brain, which is the most primitive part of the brain that controls your emotions and your motivations. So there really is a science behind how these aromas work, and they do have a direct effect, a very rapid effect actually on the brain. And I know that, you know, during my grief journey, when I was having, you know, waves of grief, which is one of the things that happens, you know, I would pull out my essential oils, put some in my palms, and just take some deep breaths. And it was very helpful to me, you know, was very restorative.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, the way your book is designed, and this is not just about the book, but the book as a tool for someone who's looking for it, covers stress, anxiety, depression, and grief. And you have a template, basically, and each chapter you follow that same template. Walk me through the steps, if you will, that are in each of those sections. What's the template that you set up?
Sure. Well, what we did is, you know, because I found those 4 pillars, we'll call them, of breath work, movement, nutrition, and spirit to be things that were recurring themes really for anything that was bothering somebody. So we reviewed things and techniques from each of those areas for those different conditions and challenges in life, like stress, anxiety, depression, and grief. So each of those sections have a section on breath work, and we talk about evidence about, you know, how breath work can decrease stress, how breath work can decrease anxiety, what it can do to help depression, how it can help you when you're grieving. And then we do the same thing with movement. You know, there's a lot of evidence out there now that movement, and we don't call it exercise, that's kind of a turnoff for people. And so we don't necessarily have to think of it as exercise. It's movement. You know, even if it's just walking or gardening, you know, even just moderate exercise, you don't have to get out and you know, run a 5K or cycle hills or anything like that. Now, some people like that, and that's great too. But just moderate exercise can be helpful to us in terms of clearing our minds, you know, being more mindful. We talk a lot about mindfulness and meditation in the book. And when we're more mindful, that is in the present, we're not worrying about the future or ruminating about what's happened in the past. So, so movement is one of the things that can help us do that. And one of the practices in movement that we talk about in the book is called forest bathing. And that's Phyllis, why don't you talk about forest bathing?
Well, we get to do that every morning. I live out in the Texas Hill Country, and we're surrounded by beautiful scenery and trees, and we take a walk every morning. And I can tell you that it's relaxing and at the same time energizing. And I think movement for me as a caregiver, it gets me out of the house. It gets me looking at the beautiful creation that God has made for us and enjoying that, and just kind of changes my focus. And it does the same thing for my husband, who joins me on that walk every morning. And it's much better to do that than a treadmill for me.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that natural environment, like the ocean, the forest, anytime you get near nature, the air is different, like the literal movement of the air, right? The ions in the air, as well as I think God has designed us to be ministered to when we're in those environments. It's almost like you feel your body relax. You find yourself breathing deeper naturally. So, you know, he did
put us in a garden.
What was that?
He did put us in a garden.
Yes, he did. I'm kind of jealous we're not there now.
Yeah. So, well, the forest bathing, it started in Japan in the 1980s. They call it Shinrin Yoku. And there's actually a lot of evidence how being out in green space, and you don't have to be in the middle of forest, it can be in green space in the city. And what they've also found is even looking at pictures of green space in nature. And if you don't have a picture, even visualizing in your mind can have the same effects. But they showed that it would decrease blood pressure, decrease heart rate, decrease cortisol, which is the stress hormone in our bodies. So there's a lot of evidence that being out in nature and just enjoying nature is very beneficial. And then, we talk about nutrition in the book. We don't think a lot about nutrition. There in medical school, we don't learn a lot about nutrition, but it's one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. Food is indeed our best medicine. And the standard American diet, or the SAD, is a lot of inflammatory foods. It's tends not to be plant-based. And the more that we've learned about anti-inflammatory and plant-based diets, the more we know that that's good for our mental health as well as our physical health. There's a number of studies now that have compared people eating, anti-inflammatory plant-based diets compared to the SAD type diets. And those people on the plant-based diets actually have a healthier mental attitude. They're less likely to get depressed, less likely to be anxious. And there's a number of studies about that now. So, for instance, the American diet doesn't have much magnesium. And magnesium is a very calming mineral. So we talk about foods that have magnesium. Of course, you can take magnesium as a supplement, but there's a lot of foods that have it, like leafy greens have magnesium, so do almonds, walnuts, so a lot of plant-based healthy things have magnesium. And then we also talk about spirit, and maybe Phyllis, you might want to take a lead on the spirit part.
Well, I can do that, but I want to say something about the nutrition as well. I know that we get around our house, we try to minimize the sugar and get our fix from fruits. But that's very important. And I also know that dark chocolate, Jan, you should really tell them about dark chocolate. I was thrilled when I learned about the value of dark chocolate.
Yes, dark chocolate is another one of those things that has magnesium. And there's actually been studies that have shown that, eating dark chocolate can be calming. Unfortunately, milk chocolate does not work the same because it has more sugar and a lot more processed ingredients. But dark chocolate is very calming. And actually, for that Dr. Weil's anti-inflammatory diet, you see dark chocolate up there at the top. Recently, though, there's been some reports from Consumer Reports that dark chocolate has some heavy metals like cadmium and lead. And so what Consumers Report did is test the levels in different types of dark chocolate. So you have to be selective. You have to get the high quality dark chocolate, I guess, just like anything else, which doesn't have, a lot of that contamination in it. And the companies are hopefully working on getting that out of the other brands as well. But you do have to be careful about the brands. But yeah, like Phyllis says, dark chocolate can be a very calming thing. And the way we wrote the book is in each of these sections, for instance, in the breathwork section on stress, I'll talk about the evidence for how, deep, slow breathing can calm your nervous system. And I'll go through different evidence-based things. And then Phyllis gives a spiritual response to it. So there's like a spiritual guide that goes along with, these evidence-based things that you can do.
So Phyllis, why don't you fill us in on that?
I'll speak to that. First of all, we come from a faith background of Judeo-Christians. And my faith has been absolutely what has kept me going for the last 10, 12 years. And I know that Jan is the same way. And that made this writing of this book a pleasure for me. I will start this by saying that I remember very vividly a time when Bill was recuperating from his surgery where his kidney was removed. He was invited to speak to the medical students at the medical school here in San Antonio. And he was introduced, and of course, since they were all medical people, the doctor, with permission, informed the audience of Bill's medical condition. And the first thing he said is, "I don't have cancer.
Mm.
My body has cancer, but there's more to this I than my body." And that is kind of where we live. We are more than physical beings, and we cannot deny the importance of our spirits, of our souls, of our hearts, and our well-being when those things are at peace. So I in the writing process, I would wait until Jan finished her sections, and then I would write my response, which I prayed through before I would write the response, and hopefully they were wed together pretty well.
Mm-hmm. It's such an important thing to remember. It's so easy to get distracted on one area of who we are, that we are mind, body, and spirit, and we're designed for those things to be aligned, right? And there's so many things in the world that get us out of alignment, either the way we're thinking, the way we're living, the way we're eating, the relationships that we allow in our lives. I mean, it's a complex web of decisions that bring us closer to or further away from wellness, mind, body, and spirit. And that's what I think what's interesting about the book that you wrote, because I also am a believer, is how important it is to make sure that that's part of the conversation. And right now, I think we have a pandemic of stress and anxiety, especially since what has gone on in the last few years and the way things are going, at least here in America. I can speak to that. So let's talk a little bit about what people can do, and you can use your book as you like to talk about that idea about the anxiety, because that's really become a really hot topic in the world.
Yes, and I just want to reiterate about the approach to body, mind, and spirit, because that is what's behind integrative medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just treating the body, you're not just treating the mind, it's the whole person. And that was our inspiration for the title, really, Breath for the Soul. So it's the breath is not just for the body, it is for your soul and what nourishes your soul as well. So for anxiety, we talked about the 4-7-8 breath. That can be a very powerful thing. And also nutrition. It turns out there are foods that are calming, some of the ones that we talked about that have magnesium, and just the anti-inflammatory, a plant-based diet in general is more calming than a diet that's high in processed sugars that, gives our blood sugar jump, and then the insulin kicks in, and then our blood sugar, drops precipitously. So we all know about the stress eating and the cycle that gets us into. So, so you can use nutrition as a way to control anxiety as well. Movement, whatever you like to do, whether it's moderate or vigorous. And then also, the meditation movements like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, those are very helpful as well. Yoga, of course, entails the deep breathing response, as well as, of course, the movement. And then there's some spirituality to yoga as well, because many people, use it for some meditation. And, meditation is one of the things that we talk about in the book that's very healthy for you and can be very helpful for anxiety as well. It's just taking a few minutes, 5 minutes, either at the beginning or the end of the day, to you can just do a guided meditation if you don't want to just have silence. There's a lot of apps now. Insight Timer is one. Headspace is another one. There's a lot of ones out there. And just choose a 5-minute meditation to just clear your mind and put things in perspective.
It's interesting when we utilize these things. I think it's important to pay attention to what we're doing with our bodies. Because when you do these things, they talk about how you sit or how you lay. And I feel like we do spend a lot of time in these constricted positions, not necessarily just sitting, but how we sit, or the looking down, or the, our shoulders come forward and we constrict our chest and our lungs. And it's like, they're all little adjustments. And I think we know them, but that mindfulness piece that you were talking about brings us back to, how am I sitting? How am I eating? How am I thinking? Right? How am
Exactly.
I moving? It's asking ourselves better questions. Now, Phyllis, I was wondering, because as Jan is talking about these 4 steps, because you've been walking through this health journey with your husband, can you give us a testimony about how these steps have really been impactful in you and your husband's journey over these last 12 years?
Yes, I can. Many examples. I recall when Jan first introduced me to an essential oil that was a blend to help digestive issues. And at that time, my husband was plagued with small bowel obstructions, and we were in and out of the hospital every 2 or 3 months. And when Jan stopped by, I think you were on the way to your ranch, Jan, and you dropped by and left that little bottle of oil at the house. And I'm a novelist, remember, so I give way more details than anybody ever wants to know when I speak. So I have to kind of rein myself in. So long story short, that oil we started using in various ways. And it kept him out of the hospital. When we found out that he had cancer, in fact, it kept him out of the hospital for 3 years.
Wow.
Was quite a feat. Nutrition. I began to really study nutrition when we had a cancer diagnosis, and I love to cook. And I had to change my way of cooking and food preparation. One of the things that I have done that has been meaningful to me, because for the last 4.5 years, we've pretty much had to hibernate because of either illness or treatment, or then the pandemic. We were just getting out when the pandemic hit, so we had to stay in. And so we've pretty much been hermits for about 4.5 years. My groceries, I either have delivered or I pick them up. But even just the mindfulness of food preparation, whether I'm peeling beets or chopping rutabagas or grating cabbage, I'm thinking about the God who made this. All various colors, the textures, and all the wonderful nutrition that comes with each bite of all those wonderful things. I think about the farmer who tilled the soil and how God provided the rain. And that's very relaxing to me. Even cooking, even, preparing meals, very helpful to me. We use the essential oils for rest in the evening, with the diffuser at bedside. Of course, the movement and exercise, but nothing more important than beginning our day with a quiet time. When Jan was talking about anxiety, one of the things that I love about the Bible is that the Bible is not filled with stories of saints. I mean, it's filled with stories about real people. And you talking about anxiety. I mean, some of these folks had some real anxious thoughts. I mean, Noah building an ark, Esther with the weight of her whole people and her family on her shoulders. And we could go on and on listing some of David, King David having to flee from his enemies constantly. And then our own Jesus, look at the anxiety, because he was fully human and fully divine. I don't pretend to know how to explain that, but he was. And I love reading some of these stories and seeing what these people did to manage their anxiety and their stress. And they withdrew. Even Jesus, he got away from even his own disciples and the multitudes, and he went to a quiet place more often than not, to the garden, where he could be quiet and he could commune with his Father. And we do that every morning. Lots of practices, and I could go on and on and on, but I do know these modalities work.
I have to say that there have been many times in my life where it just felt like you couldn't get the peace that you need, from your normal things, if you will. And it's like running to the Word of God and using the Word of God as a tool to remind myself, of who God is and who I am and his faithfulness and his sovereignty. I mean, the sovereignty of God alone is just probably one of my greatest stress and anxiety alleviators. But, the Word of God is living and powerful. So it's really, I agree. If tapping into that and being present to that, it can really go a long way. And I think when we're living a holistically healthy life, a holistically connected life, if we can connect the dots of our life, right, kind of get them all on the same page, that is wellness, isn't it?
Yes, and you mentioned connection, and we talk about that in the spirit part, because connection with others is actually a very important part of spirituality. For instance, when we're anxious about something, we can, if we talk to somebody else about it, a lot of times that calms us down, because as we're talking about it, we realize it's not as bad as I thought. They may have a suggestion, or even if they don't even have, any suggestions in there, just listening, it helps us to just vent, what the problem is. So, connection with others is very important. And then, connection with a higher being, as you mentioned, there's a book called The Awakened Brain that talks about, it's actually a study of the effect of spirituality on mental health. And it's shown using functional MRIs, which are those, radiology imaging studies that look at activity in the brain, that a spiritual person has a more activated brain, and this researcher, Dr. Lisa Miller, has also found that spiritual people are less likely to have recurrent depression, that, they can still get depressed. I mean, we remember Elijah going under the juniper tree. Phyllis tells about that story. So you can get depressed, but spiritual people are less likely to have recurrent depression. They tend to be more resilient in recovering from depression. So, and that's something that we've experienced, Phyllis and I have experienced in our own lives, is that in the valleys of the difficult things that have happened to us, that, looking towards our spirituality has been very helpful in that connection.
As Janet said, you cannot live in this world and slam the door on anxiety and stress and depression and grief. We haven't talked much about grief yet, but grief is it's a sense of loss. And that can come in the loss of many different things, but my peace and my calm and serenity are not the absence of things. I've had to accept that, that's one of those life lessons you learn as a growing adult who suffers a little bit. But peace is not the absence of negative things, but it is the presence of the one who made us and loves us lavishly. He does not insulate us and protect us from the life experience and the hardships that come our way, but he promises us that we are not alone, as Jan just spoke to.
I would love to touch on the topic of grief, because, grief is encompassed in, I think a lot of people have experienced grief over the last few years just from all the changes in their lives, and sometimes in their health and in their families and in their livelihoods. And so, it's not just the loss of a loved one, which is the most profound kind of grief, but honoring the idea that there's loss and a process of processing that loss is what we call grief. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, in the grief section of the book, in the breath part, I talk a lot just about, deep breathing. When I was going through the grief of losing my son, I didn't really know about breath work. I wish I had, because I remember at times it was difficult just to breathe.
Yeah.
So, being able to make use of that breath work. I also found that, running for me was very helpful, because that aerobic exercise was something that took my mind off, ruminating about what had happened and what will happen and that kind of thing. So the movement was very helpful to me. And then, of course, the spirituality, my connection, with my faith, my family, and for me, I found that having meaningful work was extremely helpful in my recovery. It gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And it kept me going. So I think, and whatever we do, we can find some kind of mission in it, or we can volunteer for something that helps others. But I think if we find something to do that's of service to someone, that helps us, get a focus on how we can help other people, and it helps heal our soul as well.
Any thoughts on that, Phyllis?
I was remembering as she was talking, I had a dear friend who lost her husband, and she came to stay with us. It was a few months after that. She came down from Wisconsin. She's a writer friend, and she spent a week with us. And she was so in the depths of grief, of the loss of the love of her life. And I remember Bill sitting and listening to her, which is important, to have someone to listen to you when you're grieving, and someone who will just be quiet with you. But I remember in his wisdom, he said to her, right now, you consider yourself in rehab, but you're not going to live in rehab. Right now, you're just there for a time period. We don't know how long you're going to be there. But at some point, you're going to learn to live with what has happened to you. And I think that's what we have to do. She had a broken heart. She didn't have a broken faith. She just had a broken heart. And unfortunately, grief is the price we pay for loving. And we certainly, Jan, you certainly experienced that. And Jan had tremendous loss in a short period of time. You lost 4 people who were very, very close to you, family.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, close to the time that I lost my son, I lost both my parents and my brother, who I was the guardian for. So it was a very difficult time. And just to reiterate what Phyllis said, having people that will listen, whether it's friends or family, that will listen and not give advice, that was very helpful. People just listen to what you were experiencing, to the pain you were experiencing, and not telling you what you should or shouldn't do, or like move on, or get on over this, because there are some losses in life that you don't get over, you just learn to live with them. And I found that to be true for my son. It's a journey. And so but like you say, grief can take all different kinds of forms. It can be a loss of health. It can be a loss of a friendship, even a loss of material things. And so, the same principles apply to all those kinds of losses.
Yeah.
Now, I'd love to have each of you ladies give me 3 kind of anchor points, just 3 things that you would really want the audience to take to heart. So, Jan, why don't I start with you? And it can be anything that's on your heart. There's no real expectation other than 3 things you want people to take away.
Okay, I guess the first one would be that self-care is not selfish, that we have to take care of ourselves to be able to give to others. The second thing would be take some time to meditate and be mindful for about 5 minutes once a day. And the third thing I would say is just take some deep breaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Miss Phyllis, how about you?
Well, I would say all of those work. Thank you, Jan. We have lots of friends who are doctors, and they have big, important jobs. And we pray for our doctors every morning and our friends who are doctors. But one of the things that I have found, especially in cancer treatment, is that cancer doctor, I mean, he's the best at what he does. He treats cancer, but he doesn't treat my husband as a whole person with lots of stories and family members and friends and life experiences. And I would say view people as a whole, as a soul. We don't have souls. We are souls, mind, body, spirit. View people like that. And that makes us more graceful people when we can really view people like that. And as Jan said, her first comment was, practicing self-care is not selfish. If I want to give the best care and be my best self for my husband, I must do some of these things for myself, which I do practice. And I think the third thing I would say is, since, as I said earlier, you can't slam the door and close out stress and anxiety and depression and grief. If you're not experiencing one of those right now, you're just kind of living in the in-between times, because surely you've experienced it before and they will come again. But just remember that you are not alone. The one who made you loves you, and he cares about the minor details of your life. And by the way, just as an aside, when I pray at the cellular level, not because I think God needs any instruction in how to handle things, but because I need to do that. So that's what I would leave you with.
Wonderful. Well, ladies, how can people find you and get a hold of this book, which I have a copy of for those of you on YouTube? This is what it looks like. Yes.
Okay, so our book, Breath for the Soul, Self-Care Steps to Wellness, you can find on Amazon or bn.com, or you can order it from your local bookstore. And my website is drjanpatterson.com.
And my website, which speaks more about my life as a writer of novels, is www.phyllisclarknichols.com.
Excellent. Ladies, I want to thank you so much for coordinating your schedules and being on here today, and for sharing such wholesome, healthful, helpful content with my audience today, and for being open to sharing these things, and for taking the life that you've lived and the difficulties that you've experienced and turned them into something that are a blessing and a benefit to other people. I honor your journey, and I thank you for being brave and courageous enough to turn these trials into triumph for other people's sake. I really honor that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are welcome, and we thank you for allowing us this privilege and for what you're doing for your viewers and your tribe.
Thank you. I love the opportunity to be a megaphone for great messaging and great content, because, to your community point, we need each other. We hold hands and we play telephone with the podcast, right? I link hands with you. We virtually link hands with whoever listens, and we just telephone it down the line and hope that, I trust that the right people hear the right message. It's not my responsibility or your responsibility to necessarily get it to the person. It's ours to show up and share it. That's how I feel about what we do. So thank you so much. So today, friends, if you find yourself on YouTube, please just look down below. I'll have the links that they shared there. And if you're on a podcast platform, you can head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 338, and all the links will be there as well. If you are hearing this conversation today, I trust that it was on time and on purpose for you. And if someone came into your mind, I encourage you to take the action to share this conversation with them, link hands with someone else and let them hear this, because even if the whole message isn't ready to be received, maybe there's just a piece that will help someone along their journey. Maybe that piece will help you along your journey. Maybe getting a copy of this book and reading it with friends, creating a community around it and having those conversations would be beneficial. Whatever it is, friends, thank you for taking the time to listen. And I trust that something that you've heard here, even if you've heard it before, has hit differently today and will be a piece of the puzzle to bring you to more wholeness as a mind, soul, spirit person, and bring you into congruence and alignment with who you're really meant to be, who you're designed to be. And don't forget to subscribe and share this conversation, my friends. Thank you again for joining us. And I just ask that you would remember to subscribe and share this conversation. Thank you for being with us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, content, and information with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.